In this video I'm going to make a wall-mounted longboard rack. Before we begin, do me a favor and click that like button. Also, I'm getting close to 200 subscribers, which for me already is a big milestone. So, if you like the content I make, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. That means you too, Charles. I know you're watching. Thanks guys. Now, on with the video. What's up everybody? Welcome back to Wrench at Home. Our longboards have been living in our hallway for a while now and have become a bit of a nuisance. They're getting in the way, the hallway looks cluttered, etc. So I'm going to change that by building a storage rack out of plywood that I'll mount to a wall somewhere in our house. I found an example rack that I liked on the internet that even had an image with dimensions stated on it. I printed out this image and will use it as reference while I build my own, trying to match the example as close as I can. I'm not a very experienced woodworker, so it will probably be far from perfect, but as long as it looks half decent and is functional, I'll be happy. First, I'll cut my piece of plywood to the length I need it to be. In my case, that's 72 centimeters, which is enough to store 4 longboards. I'm using a circular saw for this because it's fairly precise, cuts without splintering too much, and I can cut much more straight with this than with a jigsaw. Next, I measure out the pieces I need for the size of the board rack and use the circular saw again to cut them to size. Extra pair of hands that catch the falling pieces of plywood to prevent damage are recommended. If you're working on your own, place something like a table or big cardboard box underneath so the pieces don't have to fall that far. Now I have to determine where I'm going to drill the holes that will be the deepest part of the board slots. I'm going to drill these holes with a 2.5 cm Forstner bit. That should be wide enough to fit most boards. The slots will be angled down 45 degrees, so the prints on the bottom of the boards are visible when they're hanging on the wall, so I have to accommodate enough room for that as well. I ended up dividing the total length in 9 equal parts, marking the 1st, 3rd, 5th and 7th mark for drilling. I'm going to drill the holes using my drill press, so I know the holes are drilled straight down, especially since I'm using 18 mm thick plywood. To make sure the plywood doesn't move while I'm drilling, I'm using some speed clamps to hold it down firmly. When I have my 4 holes drilled, I mark the lines for the angled slots, which I will cut using a jigsaw with a fresh sharp blade. I used a protective cap from the Forstner bit to outline some nicely rounded corners. The 2.5 cm drill bit cap turned out to be the perfect diameter for a nice consistent look. Next, I clamp my piece of plywood down to the workbench and start cutting with the jigsaw. After the first slot is cut, I test fit our thickest longboard. If this one fits nicely, they all will. And it fits great. Now I can cut the other slots as well.
Minutes later.
The first side piece is almost done and it's starting to look a lot like my example. I'm very happy with the way this project is going so far. Now that I have figured out where to drill and cut the board slots, working on the other side of the board rack will go a lot faster. I repeat the process of marking, drilling and cutting this second side piece and we'll be back with you shortly. Cutting these slots is a bit annoying because you'll want minimal overhang while cutting, so I ended up moving my piece of plywood around for almost every cut. Now that I have all the slots cut in this side piece as well, I can trace around the rounded corners of the first side piece so both sides roughly match. Again, for me it doesn't have to be perfect. both sides of the new longboard rack ready for finishing. I'm going to round off all the edges using a router and sand off all the pencil stripes with a random orbital sander later. First, I'm going to cut the remaining pieces of plywood I need for the back braces, which will hold the sides and will be screwed to the wall. The total width of the example rack I'm using for reference measures 28 centimeters. This piece of plywood I'm using to cut the sides out of was around 29, so I didn't even bother cutting off a slice that narrow. I just marked the long sides for the back pieces and used the circular saw again to cut them out. So my rack will be a bit wider than the example I'm using, around 32 centimeters when both sides are attached. I don't think this extra 4 centimeters of width will be a problem, especially with longer boards. Now it's time to round off all the edges using my brand new router. I've never used a router before in my life, so after setting the depth I'm making some practice cuts on a spare piece of plywood of the same thickness. I did watch some YouTube videos about how to use one of these things, which direction to move, etc. And here's the result of my practice cuts. I love these rounded edges. Now let's route the side pieces first. Here you can see what a difference these rounded edges make. It looks so much more like a real product. The routing itself turned out to be pretty easy. You just have to get a feel for it. Next, I sand off all pencil marks with a random orbital sander. Before I start assembling the longboard rack, I round off the front-facing edges of the back pieces with my router as well, as these will be visible. Now it's finally time for assembly. There's no measurements for where to position these back pieces on my example printout, so I'm just eyeballing what looks good and match that for the other side. I make 2 marks on the back of the side piece so I know where to drill my holes. Then, based on those marks, I mark the top side as well, about 9mm from the edge, so my screw will end up right in the middle of the side of the back piece. I use a small wood drill bit of around 2.5mm to drill the holes. After that I use a countersink bit, so the screws will end up sitting flush with the side pieces. Now I have to pre-drill the side pieces themselves, and to determine where I need to drill, I screw in some screws so that they just come sticking out of the holes. I then press the side piece on firmly so my screw tips leave a mark and I know exactly where I need to pre-drill my holes. For this I also use my 2.5mm wood drill bit. After repeating this process for the other side, I'm ready to screw the first parts together. The screws I'm using are stainless steel universal screws, about 30mm long and 4mm in diameter. All coming together now. I'm getting a good look at the end result now that both back pieces are attached to the first side piece. Now I only have to drill and pre-drill everything on the other side, screw the side piece on, and I'll be done. Here you can clearly see how warped this piece of plywood is. I didn't use very expensive wood, but it wasn't very cheap either. I had hoped using plywood this thick that the warping would be minimal, but oh well. Luckily, it was all pulled relatively straight when I finally screwed everything together, so I don't even notice it anymore. And there it is, the finished board rack. For many of you this will probably be a very simple basic build, but man, I am proud of how this thing came out. It looks exactly like I hoped it would. I thought about finishing the rack with an oil or stain coat, but I like the blank look, so I won't do that for now, but I can always add it later. Here it is mounted to the wall in our utility room. I don't have any footage of mounting the rack to the wall, but I use stainless steel universal screws, around 50mm long and 4mm in diameter, and drilled through the board rack back pieces into the wall studs. Of course, I pre-drilled and countersunk the holes in the board rack back pieces as well. And now, with the boards in place, it's really finished. As a finishing touch, we added a shelf above the board rack to store our helmets and other protective gear. Man, that looks good. I am so excited about how this board rack turned out. Please let me know if you like this build video in the comments below, or tell me what you would have done differently. That's it for this video, thank you for watching. If you liked today's episode, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see future updates on my truck and other projects. Take care everybody, bye!